And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. Excited to be joined by Alice de Courcy today. Alice is the Chief Marketing Officer over at Cognism. Alice, a really warm welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Hi, yeah, great to be here. Excited to chat all things marketing.
Excellent, good stuff. That's exactly right. And we're going to be talking all about why marketers need to stop a scattergun approach when it comes to their marketing, and exactly how they can make it more predictable when it comes to kind of, rather than throwing marketing strategies in the air, hoping for the best, they can actually look at strategies that are going to kind of drive revenue and are going to bring in that predictable sales, that predictable growth to their business and to the strategies that they implement. So first things first, I mean, this might sound like a stupid question, but it gives us a great starting point. Why is a scattergun approach, why is just doing what you think is going to work when it comes to your marketing, Alice? Why is that a good or a bad idea?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go even one step further, which is what do I mean by scattergun? And I think for me, very much this is like the state sometimes a marketing team is in, maybe in the early days or in like a very sales-led organization where perhaps marketing is maybe seen as like second to sales. And it's basically, right, I would say, like the reactive marketing. So you're being asked to service various parts of the business with lots of ad hoc requests. There's little to no strategy behind that. And it can be quite daunting if you come into that sort of situation, or you're in that situation. Like, how do you turn that around, and how do you build out a predictable strategy from that? Because you can get so busy just executing the tasks you're being asked to without actually stepping back and thinking of the bigger picture and the strategy behind it.
Got it. So you mentioned an interesting point straight away, talking about reactive marketing. So when we say that, I mean, is there a difference, to give people tuning in an idea? What would you say is the kind of differentiator between reactive marketing and something that's more of a proactive approach?
Yeah, so I think that this was quite key. So for example, when I came into Cognism, there wasn't a plan or a strategy in place. So right now we plan, H1 and H2, we put together a strategy that gets sort of signed off across all of the key stakeholders within the business. And that's what we go and execute. We have reserved 10% capacity for things that would fall outside of that, because you do need to be reactive sometimes. But the rest of the time we're focused on those things that we have thought about and planned for, based on like strategic in-depth analysis on the data and plays that we know have worked before, or that we're going to test and drive forward. So that, I guess, for me, that's different.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if we're looking at this from perhaps, whether it's a small business, whether it's a new business approach, and they've perhaps got a few ideas in the air, so perhaps they're a service-based business, so maybe they've got a few products they offer to businesses, but they're thinking about how to bring it to market. When it comes to kind of avoiding scattergun approach, so they might think, look, Facebook ads can perhaps get me some fast traffic. Perhaps I need to look at SEO. Perhaps I need to look at Google ads. Perhaps I should be on LinkedIn. Rather than just trying all these channels, how can a business adopt something that's going to be a bit more predictable? Are there certain foundations that they need to think about before they just start trying all these different strategies and such?
Yes, that's a great question. So I guess let's break it down. It's a great thing when you come in, there's all these things you could try or get going with, but it's hard to know like where to start. So start with the low-hanging fruit. So kicking off some of the activities that would take longer to realize results, but are vital for predictability. So I'm going to break it into like the 4 things that I think about. So the first one is paid strategy. So that is very much your low-hanging fruit there. You want to get your bottom of the funnel ad strategy and placement in order, defining who's going to own that. It needs to be someone who's looking at it full time, no set and forget. You need to think about where you're going to place your first bet. So like you were talking about, what channels should those be on? And then how you're going to test and optimize those. So you need to have a testing framework and a review process in place. We do this at Cognism in 2 weekly sprints. And we have like a hypothesis testing framework that we use for any test that we'd run. And, you're going to be testing, there's all variations, not only you're testing the channel, you're testing the messaging and you're testing the offer. So you want to think about what's the low hanging fruit that we can target first. And that should be where you start. And then you need to optimize that low hanging fruit, and then you build out from there. Okay. So that's number 1.
Could we get an example as well? Just so something tangible, whether it's for Cognism, whether it's for someone else, what might be an example of something that's going to be low hanging fruit, that's going to be something we should tap into straight away?
So straight away, I would get competitor AdWords live. So why I feel like that's a low hanging fruit, it depends obviously the search volume for that. You need to go away and see if that's actually something that's going to bring you meaningful traffic and will work for your business. But assuming that does and that ticks that box, then I would say get those live. So create dedicated landing pages, create the messaging, get the ad copy and start optimizing and testing that and your bidding strategy, because that's high intent traffic that is already that you're missing out on straight away if you don't have those live. So yeah,
got it.
That would be
so
my
looking at what's working for competition in your market, and then tapping into that, as in what's going to be relevant for yourselves, for your industry, for your sector.
Well, just literally looking at the competitors within your space, bidding on their brand keyword terms, and having your own campaign set up for that, dedicated landing pages, and that would be where I'd start. That would be my lowest hanging fruit.
So to almost steal their traffic when it comes to ads.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be my first thing, and then we'd look at building that out further. But yeah, that would be where I'd start. Then I'd say like it's time to start thinking about the content plays. So I think we're going to cover it a bit more later, but you need to kick off your keyword research. So do an audit of your current position. Organize your keyword strategy into priority order, and how you should do this is look at what are the highest intent keywords that have good volume but low difficulty, and those should be like your priority one keywords that you want to go after. Don't get overwhelmed, because when you start thinking about content strategy, there's so much you could do. So if you want to do this smartly, then there's sort of an incremental way in which you can approach it. So at Cognism, for example, we'll have pillar pieces that can be broken down and feed into not only our SEO objectives, but also campaign objectives and brand objectives as well. And then the final thing I'd say is that you want to kick off your campaigns and demand gen movements. Again, I would recommend working in 2 weekly sprints and keeping it really simple. So just focusing on offer, message, and audience, that combination. And then you want to, the final top tip on this, I'd say, is don't stop before you get started by thinking about how could I scale this. Just build the demand and then scale it. So like example of this, we had, we really wanted to try a different call to action rather than just a demo. We wanted to give value before we asked for anything. Sure. So we came up with this idea to offer a sample of our data to our prospects in some of our campaigns. We call it the free leads, and we actually change that messaging depending on the audience, and that has worked really, really well for us. But at the start, it was literally just me and my marketing team pulling that data from our platform, sending it across in an Excel, because we didn't have a way to scale it. But now it's one of the most successful campaigns, delivered a huge amount of revenue to the business. My CEO didn't tell me off for coming up with that idea, and actually we've come up through engineering with a way of scaling it further. So yeah, that would be another tip on this.
Like all of those. Okay, so just breaking down some of that from the top. So talking about a keyword strategy, talking about SEO. So when we say kind of looking at perhaps the higher intent and looking at kind of maybe longer tail keywords after, would you be able to give us an example? So for anyone tuning in that's perhaps not as fluent in SEO as you or I, what that actually looks like.
So let's take Cognism, for example. We at our core are a B2B data provider. So for us, like the highest intent keyword search term that we bid on and is most successful is B2B data. Now that has a high intent, high converting now. I mean, we're sort of 2 years into this, so we know that it's our best campaign. Low volume and low competitive score. So that for us is like gold dust, and that ticks all of the boxes. So it's about finding, you're going to have to test this as well, because the intent piece does need a bit of testing, but it's what's the closest keyword that you can get to what your product actually offers. And then the key is when you're building out the copy for the landing page is that really reflects it as well. So you don't want them to land, never send them to the homepage, don't then send them to a website page, create dedicated landing pages for all of your campaigns within Google, and make sure you're building out highly relevant content to that search term that you're bidding on.
And we've covered landing pages a little bit in some episodes, Alice, but have you got any top tips when it comes to landing pages? Because I know everyone, and obviously a landing page for paid ads is going to be different to what we're talking about now, something that's going to be organic perhaps in terms, or it might not be, in terms of perhaps the structure, in terms of what needs to be made up in that. Any pro tips when it comes to making sure the content's on the mark, to making sure it's relevant, to make sure it builds trust with people when they land on it, and most importantly, in most of our cases, we want it to convert. So we actually want that user to be able to take action, and whether that's request a demo, whether that's request a free sample, whatever that action is, we want them to take.
Yeah, so I guess with your questions, that's mainly aimed at like a converting page. So we'll go for like a Google Ads page. What would our best practice be on that? So first of all, like I said, dedicated page. You actually don't really want a navigationable header. You want to make sure you're keeping them on that page, but then you need to provide enough context and copy to convince them to take an action. So I always have the form very near the top. I'll have a clear header. We always like to write copy like we talk. So try and forget about all the slang, like the marketing slang, so to speak, and just very clearly identify what the pain point is that you're going to be solving with that offer. You want to have your proof points. So you need to have your case studies or quotes from case studies and some badges. So we always have our G2 badges in support of the claims that we're making. And actually, we have found that longer landing pages convert better. So we used to have like really, a landing page that was pretty much 2 parts: header, brief information, form on the right-hand side, and then a bit of social proof. We've actually come to realize that adding more context into that landing page, so adding like another 2 or 3 sections about that topic, has really helped us to increase conversions.
Interesting. Okay. So more content, the more that's there tends to work better from your experience.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And I love the point about writing how you talk. Something I was certainly guilty of, especially when I got into digital marketing. I was using jargon all the time, and half the time when I was on the phone to clients, I'd be using all these analogies, all these terms that only myself and the web team knew, and it's half the time the customers are like, "What the hell does that mean, Sam?" And I realized some of the terms I'm using I don't even know the full extent of. So when you start to simplify things, like you've mentioned, it kind of makes it easier for your customers, I guess, not just on your digital materials, whether that's your website, your landing pages, your ads. When it comes to translating through to your sales team as well, if they're using the language, they're using the exact terms that your actual customers talk to you about when they describe your product or your service, it's only going to help, right?
Yeah, and I think we use jargon too much. Like we feel like that makes us seem more important, or like we know what we're talking about, but that's not how people are buying. That's not what they're searching for. That's not like what their intent is in that action. So if you're searching for how to do lead generation, you don't want to land on a page where the header is MQLs, SQLs, I don't know, PSLs.
There's so many now, isn't there?
Yeah, you want to land on a page which is like really clearly defining the steps you need to take to get to your end goal, and with as little jargon as possible.
Yeah, that's it. Completely up for that in terms of kind of making things simple, and ultimately whatever works. And if that is simplifying the language, and if that's going to get us more inbound opportunities, then it's only a good thing. Okay, so moving forward, I know you mentioned putting together perhaps content pillars and then building demand. What would a content pillar look like in a bit more depth from the content side of things? Are there certain things we need to think about? How do we link that to our product or service, or what examples could you perhaps share with us on that front, Alice?
Yeah, so I guess I'm just going to talk you. I think I'll probably just talk you through like how to kick off your content strategy. I think and then within that, I'll give you a real example of what we did. So I think about it in 3 parts: our SEO strategy, our demand gen campaign strategy, and our brand content strategy. Now, depending on the stage that your business is at, the amount of resources you have available, you may have to tie those 3 very closely together if you're in the early days, and you have capacity constraints. And then as you scale, you can sort of separate those out into more separate entities. So when I joined Cognism, for example, we only had 1 content writer doing everything. So we had to be really careful about how we targeted this. So what we did was as I actually mentioned, we did a lot of keyword research, and we came up with what would be our most highly valuable keyword that we wanted to rank for organically over the next 6 months. For us, that was
Okay.
B2B lead generation. That was because the volume was there. We felt like the intent was there. And it wasn't too competitive. I mean, it was competitive, but not too competitive.
Yeah.
So we mapped out the content and the content formats that we were going to produce. And these were all micro pieces of content that would then form one big pillar page on this topic, which was what is B2B lead generation? Top tip,
Right.
always ask a question, have that in the URL, and then answer it in the first paragraph of the page. And so what we were then able to do was over the course of the next 3 months, we were producing all of this blog content. A lot of it was authored by people more authoritative in the area than we were. And we had ended up being able to repackage all of that content into an ebook, which we were going to use for our demand gen and campaigns execution. And that ebook actually became 5 mini ebooks as well. And these could be used in all of our campaigns. And we were also able to make videos from some of the top performing snippets and blog posts that were trending really well. And that formed part of our brand and content play. So in the end, what we had from this one piece was that we had a page 1 Google ranking and the snippet after 3 months. We had a gated ebook, which actually had 5 mini ebooks. And was producing us a cost per lead of $13. And we were converting that at a rate of 10% from MQL to op. And then we had all these videos that were serving our brand purposes across all of our organic channels, and actually improving the ranking of the page as well, because embedding a video in a pillar page is a really good thing to do. So yeah, that's how we focused it when we were really small. And as we scaled it, we've just built out each of those 3 different entities.
And yeah, and that's a great point. So for anyone that's listening to all this and thinking, well, that sounds like a heck of a lot of work. If we don't have, or we perhaps got a small marketing department, or perhaps it's only us, perhaps we've just got a small team. Is this achievable, Alice? If we are perhaps doing it all ourselves, or we have just got a small marketing team,
100%.
is it something we can ramp up ourselves?
100%. I've done it did it during my previous role. So we went after the term legal operations. If you search that now in Google, you'll see Juro as the page 1 ranking with the snippet. And not only that, the company I used to work for, which is a multi-million pound company, Thomson Reuters, we overtook for that search term, and they have, hundreds of thousands of employees. So, and we were literally, it was me and the marketing team and a freelance writer. So yes, you can do it if you apply this technique. And then at Cognism, again, we did it with just me and this one writer, just by taking that approach. So, you can't target, 5 or 6 keywords, but you can go after one. And then you can build out a suite of content, which you can then repurpose and use across your different, content strategy pieces: SEO, demand gen, brand.
Got it. Okay. Well, we've gone quite deep on the SEO front, and that will make sense in terms of building that foundation of the keyword and then creating the content around that and going from there. And is this more of a long-term strategy? So appreciate typically paid ads tend to give us quicker results, and things like SEO and content typically tend to be more of a longer term journey. Are there any stages with either the paid ads or with the SEO, with both, where we need to say, well, perhaps we could start with the paid ads and say, look, we've tested this specific campaign for a week, 2 weeks, a month. It's not giving us the right kind of return. Let's axe it. Let's move on to something else. What times do those conversations need to take place if we perhaps start with the paid ads, because content's a bit different?
So 2 weekly sprints, that's what we do. So we
Gotcha.
are probably pretty unique in this, but I believe you have enough data in 2 weeks. If you set a budget about £100 a day, and you can maybe even make it lower than that if you really need to, but you'll be able to learn enough about that campaign on Google to know if it's something to maintain or optimize for, or just scrap altogether. So we always do it in 2 weekly sprints, and then we'll analyze, we'll adjust. By the time we've done adjusting and it's still not working, that's when we come to a decision that just isn't an avenue for us to continue down, and we'll move on to something else.
Makes sense. Yeah, and when it comes to content, is it a case of, from your opinion, once we've nailed down this search term or search terms we want to hone in on, is it a case of we just create the content, we make it as valuable as possible, we follow these strategies that you've shared with us until we get that page 1 results, and still we start seeing the traffic, seeing the leads come in? Or is there a time when we've done enough and we need to move on? What are your thoughts there?
So with the content piece, it is just a case of it will happen over time, assuming, this is caveated very strongly with, you are producing quality, authoritative content structured in the right way. So like those are the things that you need to absolutely be nailing. Quick ways that work for you to be able to see if there actually is demand out there for the content that you're producing, I would say is like, so we run always on gated content advertising through LinkedIn. And that really quickly tells us if a topic or basically a topic is going to resonate with our audience, because we'll either see that converting or we won't. And that's quite a good way to establish the things that you should start focusing on as well.
Nice. Yeah, because then you can actually see if people are interested in it, I guess. And if it gets
you don't need much budget to establish that. So yeah.
Interesting. That's a new one. Okay. Well, appreciate your short on time today, Alice. So just to wrap things up, in terms of everything we've gone through, in terms of being more proactive with your marketing approach, making sure you implement a strategy for your paid ads, and make sure you test it regularly, perhaps in 2-week sprints, and putting together content pillars, working on more of the long-term game from that front. Is there anything else that we need to bear in mind that we've not yet covered when it comes to putting all the pieces of the puzzle together?
I think, to be honest, that's the main one. I would just say, like, don't get overwhelmed. Look at the low-hanging fruit first, build it incrementally and scale it as you start to see things working. Be strict, work in 2 weekly sprints. Don't set and forget. Keep optimizing. Those are my main tips, really. Brilliant.
Well, Alice, really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks very much for sharing your insights. And if anyone tuning in wants to learn more about yourself, your company, how can they connect with you? How can they learn more about you? And what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, so my name's Alice Courcy, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to go and have a look at my profile. I'm posting quite a lot there. And then for Cognism, just go and check out our website, see what we do. We're at the heart, we're a B2B contact and account database provider, but we have a lot more to it than that.
Awesome. Thanks once again for coming on, Alice. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cheers. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit subscribe for Business Growth Show, wherever the heck you get your podcast from. We interview business leaders each and every week to provide actionable tips across marketing, across sales, all the goal to help you grow your business and grow your revenue. And with that, we'll catch you on the next episode.